Hello, and welcome to the James McDuffie Podcast, Perspectives 2020. Today, we are talking American politics. Dangerous topic, I know. But my focus is how we can fix it, and I hope you join me. Stay tuned. This is James McDuffie, Perspectives. Okay, fixing American politics. That's kind of a heavy topic, kind of a big issue, and there's going to be a lot of work. But hopefully, we can set a strategy and a plan for how we're going to accomplish that, you and me, and all of our friends and all of our neighbors this year. How are we going to make American politics better? That's going to be a challenge. Now, as I grow older, I realize a couple of things. First of all, I realize that I don't know everything. And the older I get, the more I realize the less I know. And I'd like to think of myself as a pretty smart guy. I like to think of myself as an engaged citizen and somebody that actively participates in politics. And by that, I mean, I've gone to rallies. I've listened to speakers on both sides of the aisle. I've gone and I've talked at school board and town halls and really set my voice out as somebody that cares. I've gone to Republican meetings here in my local town. I've gone to Democrat meetings, and I've engaged with people and shared ideas. But the older I get and the more people I talk to, the more I realize I don't know everything. And I definitely don't have every possible perspective on every issue. And that's going to be important as we go forward. I, as a smart individual, do not understand every perspective on every issue. But we'll get to that in a little bit. The other thing that I realize is how proud I am to be an American. I mean, you can probably see behind me, I have a really pretty American flag. And I got a flag this last 4th of July for the outside of my house. And it's because I'm really proud of America. I'm proud of the things that we've done. Sure, there's a dark past there. We started with the Civil War. You know, we had the emancipation of slaves. We had the Civil Rights Movement. We had the women's movement. We've had the gay rights movement. But the thing that I constantly remind myself of is that we had those movements because we recognized injustices in society and we fixed them. Does that mean that all injustice is fixed? No, of course not. Does that mean that every single person believes in these high ideals? No, it doesn't. But the majority of us agree. The majority of us feel positively insistent that we make these big societal changes for the better. And we've done it. Does that mean there isn't more to do? No, there's plenty more to do. And we have all of our lifetimes to get involved and try to make a difference. But that doesn't change the fact that I am proud to be an American, and I'm proud of the things that we have done, and I'm proud of the society in which we live. The older I get, the more I realize how blessed I am to have been born in this country, and how blessed I am to be in the time period in history in which we live. We live at a time in history when my sister can be a big business executive and my wife has a full-fledged career. We live in a society where my wife and I are different nationalities and nobody cares the fact that we're married. We live in a time where people have the opportunities to choose the lifestyles that they want. That is an amazing set of statements to think about compared to any other time point in history. And I am just very grateful that I live in a country with the laws that we have at the time that we are in. And I think everybody should be grateful for that. And so I don't believe in the mentality of ripping a nation down based on the sins of its past. I like to think of we should praise cultures and civilizations and countries where they're progressively moving towards the betterment of all of its population. And that's happening. And that's not just an American thing. That's a global thing. Global poverty rates prior to the 1800s were well over 90%. 90% was in abject poverty before the 1800s. And where are we now? Well, the United States is somewhere around 7%, and the global poverty rate is somewhere in like the low teens, like 11 or 12%, super low. And there's a definition of poverty: having access to medical care, having access to sanitation, having access to food and nutrition. There's all these things that we've classified, and to say that we've gone from 90% of people that haven't had these things to really low numbers that don't, that is positive. We as a society have improved. And that's something we should all be proud of, not just as Americans, but also as citizens of a much more global world. So how does this apply to politics? Well, I think us as citizens are responsible for helping improve things and to be engaged in the society in which we live. And again, that's not just voting in the election, and that's not just talking to our friends about politics, right? It's about actively going to our children's schools and to the school boards, actively going to rallies in our cities and voting for our governors and our mayors, and getting involved in the aspect of everyday living for everyday people. And I'm excited when people vote. I could care less that they vote left or right, blue or red. I don't really care. What doesn't excite me, though, is the lack of education around policies. I had a friend of mine not too long ago that was super excited about this becoming a blue state, Nevada. And I don't really care about red or blue. I care about the policies that positively impact our community, policies that actively improve my neighborhood, and policies that actively improve the welfare of everybody that lives in my state and my country. Those are the things that I care about. And I think that we really need to stop voting party lines and party policies, and we really need to understand what those policies mean and the consequences thereof. And first and foremost, that takes education. It takes us spending time to educate ourselves on policies that aren't just the policies we think are right. We need to understand policies on both sides of the aisle. When you go to an election, you need to look at the policies for, just as an example, policies for the Republican candidate, policies for the Democratic candidate, and policies for those two independents that are running. In the last election, I voted for a couple independents for the state elections here in Nevada. In a couple, I voted Democrat. In a couple, I voted Republican. I didn't just vote red, and I didn't just vote blue, and I didn't just vote third party. I looked at their policies, and based on what I saw, made me decide how I wanted to vote. One of the biggest issues right now is the communication between groups. And you kind of have to expect that, right? I mean, humans are very tribalistic. You get a bunch of 49ers fans in the same stadium as those Raiders fans, and they just hate each other. Humans are very tribalistic. That's very human of us to be tribalistic, and that's okay. It's okay to be human and to make mistakes, but I think that cuts us off from understanding that everybody in the political realm that's speaking are typically talking because they care. I was working on an engineering project once, and another engineer made what I thought was a horrible mistake. And I was like, he's trying to wreck what we're doing, and it's the wrong way to do it, and he's a horrible person. And I was a young engineer at the time. I didn't understand leadership as well as I understand it now. And I had a colleague of mine, a senior colleague, pull me aside, and he's like, James, calm down. Calm down, number one. Number two, nobody comes to work to do a bad job. Nobody. And that's important, because I think it applies to politics too. Nobody gets involved in politics. Nobody goes to the voting booth because they want to make a bad choice, right? Nobody does that. A lot of my friends that vote Democrat vote because they're voting on social issues that they think are very, very important that we correct. A lot of my Republican friends vote because they care about small businesses and they care about fiscal policies that will pay for the schools in the local area and make sure that the money is being spent on the right things so that we can get the most bang for the buck on how to improve the education systems for our kids. And so everybody is coming to the table to make a positive influence. And that's the number one thing that we need to do, number one, to improve politics in 2020, is to realize that everybody is involved because they care, because they want to make a positive influence. Everybody cares about what happens to the poor in our society, right? Everybody cares about the economic mobility of the population. They don't want the rich to get so rich and the taxes to get so high that people can't move from the middle class to the upper class or the lower class to the middle class. They don't want that. And so they care. They care that everybody pays their fair share. They don't think that huge swaths of the population should necessarily get a free ride. And then the other group thinks that you have to take care of the underprivileged. There are people in our society that have been given a bad hand, whether that's medical issues or social economic issues. They just haven't been given the same opportunities. And how can we consider ourselves a socially responsible population if we don't care about those individuals? And then the whole medical care issue. I think everybody cares that people in our society have access to medical health. It's not a red or blue issue. Everybody cares about maximizing the health that people can, or the health care that people can have access to. The difference is in policy. The difference is in how they solve the problem. And that's very important to recognize, is everybody's coming to the table because they care. So that's number one. Number one thing that we fix this year, realize that everybody cares. And maybe that'll shift your perspective on how to listen to people. Because if you come at it from they're not a bigot, they're not a racist, they're not an idiot, they're not a moron, but instead they care about this issue, maybe it'll allow us to listen better. And that comes to point number two. I think people fail to recognize that there are a million different ways to solve a problem, right? And every single problem has multiple solutions, and every solution has a set of pros and cons, right? And the pros and cons are the things that we need to weigh most heavily so that we get the right solution. I think politics don't do a good enough job at helping us understand the pros and cons. You have the right or the left, and they're like, hey, look at my healthcare plan, and it's perfect, and it's going to solve all of your problems. But that's not the truth. The truth is, the plan over here is going to make it so that all these groups are uninsured, and the plan over here is going to insure everybody, but make their deductibles so high that they're not even going to be able to afford the healthcare that they supposedly now have because they have insurance. Those are different problems, and they're different consequences. And the problem in politics is that the issues that we're discussing are very complicated issues, very complicated. And changing a specific policy can have massive amounts of consequences that we may or may not be willing to allow. Now, some consequences are really good consequences, and other consequences are really bad consequences. And what we need to do is find the balance where the good outweighs the bad. And the one thing we need to remind ourselves is there is no perfect solution. We will always make trade-offs. As an engineer and in engineering, we have this thing that called a 7 ways document, where before we design something, we have to think of 7 different ways of how to build it, and we need to understand the pros and the cons. Now, most of the time we know which way we're going to go do it because we've had enough experience where the other 5 or 6 ways may not be as good, and we understand the pros and cons, but every now and then we come up with another solution that we're like, we didn't think of this. And the pros and the cons are far better for this other option than the primary 1 or 2 options that we were originally going to go with. That is something that we need to acknowledge, is that it doesn't matter whether it's a red or a blue policy. The devil is in the details, and there's a lot of minutia that we need to spend more time in understanding to really understand the consequences of what these policies are. Okay, so there's multiple solutions. Now, the other thing to realize is we don't have the answers all of ourselves. If there's 1,000 different ways of fixing things, I don't know them all. I have one good idea. And if I don't listen to somebody else, whether they're right or left, blue or red, whether they're, crazy or the most intelligent person on the planet, if I don't listen to them, I won't learn of a potential better solution. And I think that's what we need to challenge ourselves to do, is to be willing to listen to other people. So that comes into my next point is, in business, we have a skill that we teach most of our employees, and it's called active listening. Okay? Active listening has 3 important tenets. The first one is biting your tongue and actually letting the other person finish, regardless of what you think. If somebody has an opinion, I need to shut up and let them state their opinion or state their facts or state their perspective. Once I've done that, the second piece is to repeat it back to them so that I can show them and myself that I understand what they're saying. So if somebody gives me a set of policies, then I can repeat back to them what problems they were trying to solve, what the solution gave as the benefits, what the pros and cons were. I actually give it back to them so that I myself actually understand it. And then ask for clarification is a third part, is, well, what do you think that means in this particular case? Or what do you think that means in this specific situation? And how would you handle it if this was a problem that you were trying to solve? And I think in healthcare, that's really important because, again, there's a lot of minutia. It's a very complicated topic. And so if you ask questions to get their view, you'll accomplish 2 things. 1, you'll understand their perspective much better. 2, you don't jump to an immediate set of massive conclusions of how they would solve all these issues that you didn't think that they had thought through. Most likely they did think through them. It's just not in their 1-minute soundbite when they're trying to convince you. And 3, you're going to do something even more powerful. You're going to allow them to lower their defenses, right? They're going to lower their defenses, and they are going to open up to you in a way that they haven't opened up to another individual other than somebody that agrees with them entirely, right? And by doing that third piece, you get to all of a sudden win them or have an opportunity to share your ideas. You're going to win them to the idea that you may bring something to the conversation because you didn't immediately shut them down. That's super important. It's probably one of the biggest problems that we have in politics right now, is that, people on one side are calling the other side bigots and people on this side are calling the other side stupid when it couldn't be further from the truth. Everybody cares. Everybody has a perspective and everybody has a potential solution, and we're just not aware of all of the perspectives or all of the solutions. So we really need to focus, I think, this year for 2020 on listening to people that have different perspectives than our own, and using these active listening skills to dig into their ideas and dig into understanding why they hold those perspectives. Because one of the things that we need to realize is that, and myself as well, right, is that people have different life experiences. People come from different countries, they come from different communities, they've seen different problems, they've seen different attempts at solutions. That's something that you may not realize is, what if you have this perfect solution and they have a problem, and then you don't listen to them because they're telling you it won't work, but you're completely convinced that your solution will work. And then you start a conversation with them and they tell you that somebody tried to apply that solution and they list off a whole slew of negative consequences that you weren't even aware of. Well, those were things you weren't aware of, and they weren't consequences that you had even thought of. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to shift your perspective on what the right solution is, but it could change some ideas around it. Or it could allow you to augment your idea, to make a couple changes to it, to take those problems into consideration in the total solution, so that you don't end up with the same problems that they had previously seen in another potential implementation of it. And so I think those are really important things for us to recognize. People want positive change and they care. There are many, many solutions to any given problem. And if we don't listen to other people, we cannot and will not learn other perspectives and come to a better solution. Okay. So I think those are very, very important things in the 2020 election year. However, the next piece of that is sharing our ideas in a very civil and non-confrontational way. Because just because you can change yourself and you can change how you listen, you won't necessarily change other people. And so you have to tweak your message, change how you present your facts so that other people are more willing to listen. And that doesn't mean not talking about it. It doesn't mean hiding the facts. And it doesn't mean losing all the important context. What it means is presenting things in a way that the other person may not have thought of your problems that you care about before. And so this gives you an opportunity to say, well, I understand your perspective. First, always acknowledge their perspective. I understand your perspective, but I'm concerned with the fact that all these people get healthcare plans and they have super high deductibles. And now that even though they have insurance, they still can't afford actual healthcare. Yes, all their basic standard cares are taken care of, but that's $10,000 that poor families don't have for a high deductible healthcare plan. And then you give them an opportunity to respond, and you build a dialogue and a conversation rather than an argument in which both people get upset and no solutions are found, right? I think the other thing that's really important to do in these types of conversations to keep them civil is to realize that there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution, and that we also live in a very big nation, which means a solution for somebody in California may not necessarily be the solution for someone in Nevada or Florida or Texas or New York. Some of these issues are very unique to certain locations, and that's why my personal belief is that a lot of these issues should be instead handled at the state level instead of the federal level. The federal level could mandate water restrictions nationally when there's only 4 states that are currently going through a water crisis. Why would you limit water rights to a whole bunch of farmers in states that don't have water issues when you care about only the states that have the water issues? And so a lot of these policies need to be recognized as local issues. And that can also be adjusted in your conversation to say, well, I understand that that's an issue in this state, but it doesn't quite work that way in our state. Our state does it this way. And you might actually bring people over to understand that local issues and certain policies make more sense locally than they do at the federal level. I mean, especially this year, since we're doing another presidential election, a lot of people are concerned about this policy for everybody. But this policy for everybody doesn't always work. Policies for California don't work in Nevada, and policies in Nevada don't work in Florida. And we need to recognize the differences in those policies need to take location into account. And so last but not least on that specific topic, I think the most important thing to have civil conversations is not to marginalize other people's concerns, right? Climate change is a controversial topic, and I plan on having another podcast specifically on all the extremes of climate change, from it's not real to the world's going to end in 5 years. It's a fascinating topic, and I'd love to discuss it. But the thing that we have to realize is people have valid concerns, right? And when you instantly marginalize somebody's concerns, they shut down. And if you constantly marginalize people and their concerns, then they don't take an active part, which means that person's not going to go to the voting booth, and they're not going to speak out at a town hall, and they're not going to go to a local rally. That's not how you motivate people to get involved. And so what you should be doing is acknowledging that they have valid concerns and they should get involved, and they need to partake in the society around them, in the community around them, to build bridges rather than burning them down. And a good example is I had a friend of mine. I was going through a rough transition in a relationship, and him and his spouse weren't listening to each other. And so he would say something and she would kind of marginalize it, and she would say something and he would marginalize it, and they weren't actually taking their concerns into consideration, and they were saying relationship done, right? And then I talked to both of them and said, well, you have valid concerns, but why did you throw the other person's concerns out the window? Well, are those not valid concerns in the relationship? Did their opinions not matter? And they thought about it. No, they do matter, actually. I shouldn't have just marginalized that opinion. And then they started talking about it, and once they realized that they were marginalizing each other, they found better solutions. They found ways of making the relationship work. It's the same in a society. It's the same with political issues, is when you validate somebody else's concerns and they validate your concerns, you can have a better conversation and you can actually come to real solutions because everybody's concerns are met. And not every solution fits everybody's needs. There needs to be compromises. And I think the harder part is identifying all the potential consequences of certain policy choices. And we need to understand that those consequences could have dire effects down the road. And we need to minimize those dire consequences from any given policy that may be put into place. But again, that's the beauty of government. That's the beauty of the system that we have. If you have a law that gets put into place and it has problems, you can change that law. Just need to make sure that you're active and involved to help change it. So last but not least, how we fix American politics in 2020 is by building our communities. And that's by being as inclusive as possible. We need to, as a culture, to invite people to rallies. We need to invite people to town hall. We need to invite people to take part in the community. I think one of the huge or one of the largest gaps in politics right now is the inability to make voting completely electronic, right? If you want maximum population to take part in the government and in opinions, you need to make a system that says, here's the policy, here's the left side of the argument, here's the right side of the argument, here's the potential consequences of this policy, good and bad, and then allow the person to read that and click what they want. So you're merging that little pamphlet that they send home with you on specific topics and issues, and you're merging the fact that people actually have to take time out of their workday to drive down to the courthouse to cast their vote, and you're saying, no, you can do it on your lunch break. You can do it when you're waiting 10 minutes in the hall for your friends when you're, gonna go to the bowling alley. Making voting as simple and as easy and as pain-free as possible is the best way to maximize the engagement from the population around us. Well, how do we do this? Well, the nice thing is the caucuses for the Democrats have started using electronic voting. And we as a society should promote this for all voting. We want more engagement. We want people to care. So why not make it as easy as possible? And lastly, how do we build these communities? Well, we ourselves need to take the social responsibility on the mantle and listen to other sides of the argument. I'm a moderate. I've gone to Republican rallies. I'm a moderate. I've gone to Democratic rallies. I've seen Republicans at Democratic rallies. I've seen Democrats at Republican rallies. And that doesn't mean that you're sitting there clapping for everything. It means that you're sitting there with an open mind, willing to listen. And not every policy you agree with. A good example is I went to Pete Buttigieg, his rally here in Northern Nevada. And I really loved his positive messaging. I love the fact that he's saying, we are one nation, we are one community, we are one people, we are Americans, and we need to do what's best for all of us. We need to all work together to build a stronger society. That's a positive message, and that's something that I can get behind and 1,000% back. Now, that does not mean I back all of his policies. I think a couple of his policies are pretty financially disastrous, not as bad as other policies, but that's okay. But I like that message, and I want to applaud Pete Buttigieg for having such a positive outlook and such an inclusive view to the world around us. That is important. We need to make sure that nobody is forgotten and every voice is heard in American politics. And that to me, building communities, working with our neighbors, taking part in town halls, going to rallies, listening to the debates, listening to the presidential State of the Union, whether he's our president or not. We need to take part in our society. We need to take responsibility for the direction that our society is going. And we need to take responsibility for bringing other people into the fold of being a part of the policies and the politics that we all think are important. We need to bring people in and give them those opportunities. So that's how I think we fix American politics in 2020, right? We recognize everybody cares. We take the opportunity to realize that there's many solutions and many perspectives to every single problem, and that our perspective may or may not be the right one. We take the opportunity to actively listen to our fellow Americans. We actively listen to our neighbors, and we don't marginalize them. We make sure that their issues and their matters and their concerns are absolutely heard. And then we do it as Americans. We do it as a community. We do it together. And I don't care if somebody is a Republican, an independent, a libertarian, or a Democrat, or anything else under the sun when they go into that voting booth. All I care is that they're taking part. All I care is that they care. That they are trying to make the future better for our kids. That they are trying to make our communities better for our neighbors and our friends. And that's what really matters. Thank you for joining me. My name is James McDuffie. This is the Perspectives Podcast. And I hope you join me next time. Have a great day.